Welcome back to the Grace Life Church podcast. I'm your host, Brian Clark, back with my good friend Tim Robertson, and we are talking today about Christians and politics and just this really controversial topic and how we're to be involved, and Christians should be involved in politics. And so today what we're going to look at is pastors and ministry leaders that have been involved in the political environment. Before we do that, I do want to encourage you, if you're new to the channel, subscribe to it. We bring you fresh content every day of the week, Monday through Friday. And then also like and share on whatever platform you're watching on so we can reach more people than truth. And so, Tim, let's jump into this. Talk to me a little bit about pastors, ministry leaders that have been involved in government.
Oh, man. You look back at our revolutionary times, there was a group that the British said we would have won had it not been for this Black Robe Regiment.
What was the Black Robe Regiment?
They were a group of pastors that got their congregations involved in the process of the revolution. Most notably, most people know about John Peter Muhlenberg. He was preaching from Ezekiel, and he says there's a time for this and there's a time for this, and he was standing there behind the pulpit, and he says, and this is a time for war. And he got to verse 8, and he says, he removed his black robe that he had on, and underneath it was a military garb. And he ended up being one of the great generals of the, and 300 people followed him out of his church to go fight against the British. And what's interesting about him is he didn't just stop after the Revolutionary War. He went and become I think a senator afterwards. So he just didn't stop at being a pastor. He went into the governmental role. We think about James Garfield, who was a president of the United States, very much a pastor at heart, become president. Pastors are the greatest representatives of a body to start with. How many, I drive a little over 30 miles to come to church because this is a great one, Grace Life Church. But I've always said that I pass 100 churches on my way to church. And each one of those churches are a governing body. And they have this thing called a representative, and that's their pastor who's supposed to shepherd over them. It's a system set up by God. Mm-hmm. And if the enemy is using the governmental realm to advance their cause, the church cannot stay out of that arena and remain silent.
See, and this to me again goes back into what we talked about yesterday about the separation of church and state, and now that really is a myth, and how it seems like Christians, we often view, we've got kind of like the religious world or the spiritual world, and then this other dark, evil thing called the political world. And it's like we just can't get involved, or maybe we'll vote, but other than that, we don't want to be very involved in it. But you're actually saying historically that's not the way things are done.
Not historically, no. Like I said earlier, one of the earlier podcasts, is the fact that there are evil people that are ruling is because nobody who was good applied for the job.
It's funny.
But what would a world look like when people who were active Christians that held the same values as you and I, or those watching today, were in charge? Would the world look different? Absolutely. Charles Finney, you love him because you love
I love
revival. Revival. But he wrote in his essays of Hindrances to Revival, he wrote this. He said, politics are part of religion in such a country as this, and Christians must do their duty. And we don't understand that word duty. Duty is not just something it's something you're obligated to do. But Christians must do their duty to the country as part of their duty to God. And it seems sometimes as the foundations of this nation were becoming rotten, and Christians seemed to act as if they thought God did not see what they did in politics. But I tell you, he does see it. He will bless or curse this nation according to the course we take.
And it's a big deal that one of the things that you were saying, it reminds me of one of the the earliest heresy, if I'm not mistaken, in the church was this heresy called Gnosticism. And the whole heresy was the theme of it was the world is so evil that we just need to be these spiritual people, and we don't actually need to repent of sin, or we don't need to actually bring any kind of tangible change. It's just know about this deep intellectual knowledge of God. And while that's true on a personal level, or the people, the Gnostics, that's what they were doing. They weren't even trying to repent of sin and change their behavior or anything else. It was just this deep intellectual level. It seems like we've got a lot of Christian Gnostics running around as far as politics. Like, politics is so evil, we can't get involved. We just need to know Jesus. But Daniel even says, those who know their God will be strong and do great exploits. The knowledge of God has to lead me to act. Otherwise, I can't say I really know God.
Absolutely. We become so heavenly minded, we're no earthly good. That we feel like that's out of our realm of influence, but we have to be like watchmen on the wall, Ezekiel 33. And when we see unrighteousness and when we see things undone, we must blow the trumpet, or we're held accountable for not speaking out on these subjects. And people go and they say, well, we need to stay out of this realm, and we need to let that be, because they don't listen to us anyway. The reason the politicians don't listen to the Christians is because the Christians don't vote.
Yeah.
They've got to that point. If I was running for office and you're a voter, I'm going to listen to you. And if you don't vote, I have no reason to lobby or even get to know your values or get to understand you or push your agenda, because you do not vote. That's how important it is for us to get involved and make sure that we do the one thing that we're not casting our vote, is casting our voice. And the misconception of staying out just allows the enemy to stay in.
Yeah, well, and again, the heart of this, and this is where I'm hoping out of this, one of the things out of this podcast on this topic that people get is how important it is to get involved and how you can't separate the political from the spiritual. Because Matthew 24, Jesus said, because lawlessness, or because sin will abound, the hearts of many will grow cold. And as a nation, when we just allow lawlessness to abound, because we as Christians hang out in church and Bible studies and doing all the stuff we love to do, but we don't actually go and do some things to promote righteousness outside the four walls, to restrain sin outside the four walls with godly legislation, then what ends up happening is people go crazy. It's kind of like you and I were talking off camera about, homosexuality today. And again, we don't hate homosexuals. I love homosexuals. I'm not, but I think we talked to, both of us knew one homosexual student in high school, and yet today, like, I've got kids in school that have 5, 6, 8, 10 kids in their class of 25 people that identify as gay, bisexual, and where did that come from?
That is the mystery of most parents are coming at, is the student or their child will come home and go, Mom, I no longer identify as a male, I identify as female. And our first thing as parents is, where did you get that idea?
Yeah.
So if they're teaching it through the school systems, where evidently they're being indoctrinated, it is our duty, I use that word again, to be a part of the school board to make sure those certain curriculums and those certain ideas, if they are not co-equal to our values, we must speak out against it. I know Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who faced a lot more tougher trials than we did, said that silence in the face of evil is evil itself, and God will not hold us guiltless. He says, not to speak is to speak, and not to act is to act. Not to do anything is an action.
Well, and actually like what you brought up about the school boards, because a lot of times we think, government, well, that's president, that's the senator, House of Representatives. But when you were in Colorado, you guys got involved with help changing school boards. Can you tell me a little bit about that and why y'all did it, and then the impact it made?
I was lucky to get involved in the little town of Woodland Park. They had the first elections they've had in 15 years. And there were 4 conservative candidates. We got behind them, pushed, and all 4 of them won those. And we swept that area. And what do? You get teachers unions showing up by the hundreds at the school boards protesting. So we struck a chord in that. So we flipped that. But not just that, we worked with a Christian voter guide that allowed in Colorado Springs alone to flip 78 school board seats conservative. So don't think it can't be done. It's too far gone. If you start at the local level, and that's really the most important level, because that's the government that's closest to your children and to your family. You start with your sheriff and your city councils and your mayors, because that's the real world you live in.
Yeah.
And we spend way too much time focusing on a national government when it really is a local government that really dictates your happiness in life. So.
And if you get enough local governments flipped, it's going to affect the state, and it's going to affect the national. And, well, man, thank you for today. Today. If you didn't get a lot out of today, you need to go back and rewatch it. That was really a lot of good content. So that Tim shared with us. So again, I want to thank Tim for being on today, and we'll be back again next week. And it's going to be really good on this topic again of Christians in politics. So again, if you're new to this channel, I would encourage you, before you sign off, subscribe. The more viewers we get, it helps promote us and brings more content out on the Facebook and YouTube algorithms, however that works, and helps us reach more people with the gospel. So thank you for doing that. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.